Electronic Arts is regularly regarded as one of the most aggressive, most destructive entities within the video game industry. The publisher has a history of treating its employees poorly, treating its audience poorly, and routinely dashing all hopes of quality sequels to properties they own. That reputation has softened recently, but the full list of studios they've closed and the number of people they've left jobless will always hang over the company. At the start of the millennium, EA were particularly antagonistic, purchasing a large number of well-loved studios, making drastic changes to their development cultures, and later closing those studios when the talent inevitably fled the sinking ship. The closures of Pandemic Studios, Origin Systems, and Kismai were rather endemic of EA takeovers, but arguably, the most brutal was the closure of Bullfrog Productions in 2001. Bullfrog's catalogue had been picking up some promising momentum, with each fresh concept being executed impeccably. That creativity was quickly stifled by the new ownership, and a number of rushed sequels were squeezed out of the developer before EA tossed the drained husk aside. Theme Park predates Rollercoaster Tycoon by half a decade, and paved the way for the theme park management games that are still beloved today. A direct sequel to Theme Park was created under Electronic Arts management, which was released worldwide on a number of platforms throughout 2000. Was there any possibility that a whimsical, friendly management game could emerge from the collapsing Bullfrog? Would that game live up to its predecessors? Or has EA not changed its tyrannical business strategies throughout the last 20 years? The footage for this video was recorded on stream. If you'd like notifications for when I go live, or you'd like to chat about games and videos, join the Discord in the description.
That's pretty good, actually. No way.
Debuting in 1994, Theme Park was Peter Molyneux's second business education game. Targeted at a younger audience, Theme Park's objective was to provide an attractive environment for children to learn the operation of a business, but the resulting game ended up being popular among all audiences. Previous business sims had neglected the fun aspect of their games, choosing to focus on providing an accurate representation of the business environment at the expense of all else. This fun-facing design philosophy would underpin the rest of Bullfrog's projects, which soon became the defining through line across their catalogue. Theme Park's silliness was extrapolated upon within Bullfrog's first follow-up to Theme Park, Theme Hospital. Running a real hospital isn't as conceptually light-hearted as running a theme park, but Theme Hospital's tone and fictional illnesses keep things pleasant. While the game was well received, it didn't reach the sales targets that EA had set for the project. A true sequel to Theme Park was requested, and in the year 2000, Theme Park World was released. Theme Park World is a much more complex game than the original Theme Park, featuring a much broader selection of attractions, 4 distinct themes for the park, and the ability to customize and ride the rides. The business management aspects were kept intact, but the player also had the goal of acquiring golden tickets, or keys, to unlock the next theme, and progress between parks as well. In some versions of the game, this manifests as a kind of campaign that the player can embark upon. And it looks an awful lot like my closing comments on the movies whenever the player graduates to the next level. Was there some clairvoyant on the design team, able to predict the coming exodus from Bullfrog and the echoing career path that Molyneux was to take? Video game development in the late 80s and early 90s didn't take the multiple years that modern games take to construct. Solo developers were routinely shipping at least 1 game per year, sometimes more. So when a video game developer had a staff, they could massively increase their game's polish, tighten their focus, and guarantee consistency between projects. Their games couldn't necessarily be larger due to hardware limitations, but the number of developers with reputations for quality releases every time was pretty close to the total number of video game developers. Bullfrog Productions were routinely shipping 1 or 2 excellent games per year, and had garnered a number of fans as a result. When EA gained control of the company, the number of simultaneous projects being developed at one time more than tripled to appease a mandate sent to the developer. This prioritization of quantity over quality disgruntled most of the senior Bullfrog staff, including Molyneux, who, upon announcing his resignation, was banned from entering the Bullfrog studio while still required to contribute to the development of Dungeon Keeper. Molyneux's departure triggered many other Bullfrog employees to leave the company, as EA had predicted. So in order to continue development of their mandated games, EA moved much of the development of Theme Park World to French developer Mindscape. It was this split development that caused the numerous version differences of Theme Park World, which affected the game significantly. For this video, I played the PlayStation 2 version, but as a child I spent a lot of time with the Windows demo that came with the family computer. That PC version is much more freeform. There are only 4 total parks to play, but the requirements to unlock each is significantly more involved than the tasks required to progress on the PS2 version. Theme Park World's campaign involves completing a handful of objectives within each park to earn the required number of golden tickets to purchase access to the next park. The player will be informed of 3 of the objectives, namely to have a certain number of guests in the park, to stay in business for a certain number of years, and to earn a relatively small profit throughout the course of the park's life. There are hidden tickets throughout each park too, which are relatively easy to find once the player notices the pattern. All of these goals are extremely easy. Staying in business for long enough involves simply being somewhat reserved in hiring staff, and the other objectives will complete passively as long as the park stays open. Tickets are frequently earned by winning mini-games, which range from go-kart races to puzzle games, and require the player to build the related attraction in their park. Some of these games stretch the definition of game. The strength test, for example, asks the player to decide how hard they'd like to hit the target, and then hit the target that hard. If they choose to hit the target hard enough, they win. Compared to the go-kart minigame in which the player gets to design the track they'll race upon, it seems there wasn't a high bar for minigame suggestions. Everyone's favourite part of a theme park management game is the rides, and Theme Park World has a gigantic selection of rides that spin the guests around, as well as a few others. Each theme has its own unique bundle of rides that the player will periodically receive through research. Okay, I get that most theme park rides revolve around some part of the machine, but Rollercoaster Tycoon features a lot of rides that offer other riding experiences besides just spinning. 3 of the first 4 rides in the game involve spinning around an axis, which slightly poisoned my impression of the game. Were all of the rides going to be so bland? I didn't remember there being so little variety. As things progressed, the ride selection populated with broader choices, but becoming aware that most rides are a vehicle to spin guests made each new instance more disappointing. Aside from the flat rides, Theme Park World also contains a number of tracked rides that allow the player to customize the layouts. The roller coasters are almost all exactly the same thing, despite there being a lot of variation between the roller coaster types in terms of appearance and specific elements. Hades, one of the 2 horror-themed roller coasters, uses boat trains and a log flume style track, but it amounts to the same thing as any of the other coasters. The player places pylons within a range in front of the previous pylon to draw a layout on the ground. Loops can be added from this construction mode, but the heights of each pylon cannot be edited while in pylon placing mode, so the player has to exit one building style in order to enter the other. Lift hills are automatically generated, so the player can only learn of the weaknesses in their layouts once they've begun editing the pylon heights. The coasters will never crash though, and the designs can never be too tall. I don't think I managed to create a ride that had anywhere near a good stat range, and I found myself refusing to attempt to build coasters because I just couldn't get a satisfying ride. I think a just above average rating was the highest that I managed. My favourite ride as a child was the go-kart tracks, and I still found them a lot of fun as an adult. Unlike go-kart tracks in Roller Coaster Tycoon, Theme Park World go-kart tracks can cross through themselves to create these very dangerous elements. The height of the track cannot be edited, so I had to get the most out of these crossings and the researchable elements as I could. Aside from deciding which rides go into their park and where, the player will also be responsible for placing amenities for their guests and staff, hiring staff, paying, training and setting work locations for them, setting the ticket prices, researching rides, upgrades, shops, minigames and decorations, upgrading the rides, customizing the rides, and making decisions on statistical information. As far as the management load, this game is very light. Most options are simply selected from a list that never contains more than about 8 choices, and so many things cannot occur simultaneously. Typically, I hired one of each staff type, selected a few new amenities and rides to be researched, and then waited for the game to tell me when something was lacking. So if too many guests were unable to find somewhere to put their litter, the ant guy would show up and tell me about it. There aren't complex stat adjustments to figure out, and most problems are resolved by building new things in the parts of the park that haven't been fully furnished yet. Some of the rides being useless without a few upgrades was fairly annoying, and being advised that a group of staff are thinking about striking unless conditions improve is also quite frustrating. A lot of useful information is not divulged to the player, while the game also frequently notifies the player about a ride's imminent breakdown. It would have been helpful to know where litter was becoming a problem, or where the guests were struggling to find food and drink. Basic stuff that other games would make freely available to the player. This information may have actually been present somewhere in the game, but the atrocious user interface made finding that information impossible. A large portion of Theme Park World gameplay is spent within this blue menu. Each of these categories seems self-explanatory, and a few of them actually are. Build and hire leads to the construction and staff hiring menu, research leads to the research menu, and game options takes the player to a few audio settings, as well as the save function. When building, it was a bit strange that toilets, staff rooms, security cameras, and bins are all under the same menu category and use the same item pool as the decorations, but refraining from using decorations was just easier than managing the pool. Information is a very broad title that contains very few actionable categories. Staff can be trained, fired, and their patrol areas set through the staff information subcategory. Then rides, shops, and sideshows have their own information menus within which the player can do almost nothing. Financial information contains a bunch of graphing options that are illegible, and use scales that are nonsensical. But there is a list of incomes versus expenses that can be useful on occasion. Park Statistics tracks a few stats that are interesting but inconsequential. And it is also the menu through which the player can change the admission price. Not information or financial information. Park Statistics. Close Park also doesn't do what you'd expect. Selecting Close Park takes the player back to the park selection menu. It doesn't close the park. At the start of every level, the player has to select the entrance and open the gates, which makes the language of this option very confusing. Menu awkwardness aside, there are some other oddities within UI layered upon the park ground. All building blueprints include at least one tile of path in order to allow guests and staff entry to the facility. That path tile cannot overlap an already existing path, as the path tile is considered part of the blueprint. Paths can connect on any axis, and the building can be accessed all the same if the blueprint tile is within a normal pathway or beside it. This means that, like the roller coaster construction system, to build something directly connected to an existing path involves deleting a single tile of the old path and replacing it with the blueprint tile by repeatedly switching between building menus. If the PC version were as convoluted as this, I doubt I have so many fond memories of it. The presentation of the PlayStation 2 version also doesn't match my memory. Bullfrog games have a signature visual style that makes them immediately recognizable, and Theme Park World boasts that style, but not in all the ways I expected. I cannot deny this game's presentation is ridiculously charming. All of the buildings are so characterful, and the palettes are fantastic. The parks are fun to look at from the standard camera angle, which is very important for a game like this. I like a lot of the ride visuals, especially this prehistoric theme, and the shops are mostly just as fun. I did prefer the character sprites to these character models though. The sprites had more of that Bullfrog aesthetic that the modelers certainly tried to capture, although I don't think they were overly successful. Theme Park World's soundscape is also a lot more jarring than I prefer. I didn't recall as much screaming as I heard, and I did have to reduce the screaming volume to make some parks tolerable. The horror-themed parks were especially difficult to listen to, with the combination of the screaming and the grating strings in the park music. But the space theme had some similar issues. The soundtrack overall seems muted compared to footage of the old PC version. I suspect this and a few of the other changes have contributed to the technical issues I encountered while playing. It's been a while since I last saw a game crash. It must have been Shadow's Heretic Kingdoms back in June. Theme Park World isn't nearly as unstable as that game, but it did die on me a couple of times. These crashes were the most severe of the issues, but a lack of polish is somewhat prevalent across the whole game. Guests would frequently become trapped on paths without any obstacles to cause them to become trapped. Perhaps the pathing was breaking down, or their models were clipping into the ground, I'm unsure. But stuck guests would always cause the advisor to pop up and demand I place more drink stalls. The parks always seem kind of empty anyway. There are never enough guests to make things seem crowded and prosperous, even when the player goes down to ground level to wander around themselves. I am also under the impression that a visual was supposed to be attached to the research menu. When selecting a new attraction to research, the player is given the name and nothing else. Is Sun God a roller coaster or a spinning flat ride? Are the stats any good? The player will have to sink a significant portion of time and resources into whatever Sun God is to find out. And there are limits to the number of items that can exist within a park. Usually, there is a maximum of 2 roller coasters and up to about 50 features, which includes the mandatory amenities like toilets and staff rooms. Is the park's land space not an effective limiter on objects in the world? It just seems that there's an arbitrary cap on the amount of giant gorillas one could place for no good reason. I don't know if it is necessarily possible to play Roller Coaster Tycoon 2 and Planet Coaster to a point where they're lacking new things to do, especially the latter. But if you have reached that stage and still want to play a theme park management sim, then I'd say give Parkitect a look. And after that, try and get the PC version of Theme Park World running. What fun there is to be had with Theme Park World is very surface level, and the more free-form nature of the PC version means that the player is able to access the more enjoyable things sooner and won't have to battle this horrible UI. Theme Hospital and the movies are far more enjoyable Bullfrog-style management games, so I'd direct people that way before anywhere else. But as far as a theme park sim on the PlayStation 2 goes, I think this is the best one. The Bullfrog spirit is certainly present within Theme Park World, but EA's demand for more products sooner has resulted in some cut corners that reduce the overall quality of the game considerably. Things are colourful and charming, and there's a great range of silly concepts among the various assets within Theme Park World that lets the player know this is bona fide Bullfrog Productions software, but it doesn't elicit the same emotional response that other Bullfrog games might. EA exchanged a lot of the Bullfrog audience's goodwill and enthusiasm for a payout. They capitalized on a beloved IP library for some easy cash, and then moved on to their next victim. Theme Park World doesn't exist for the right reasons, and I think it would be better if the game didn't exist at all. Next time, Zach, we'll be in some town in the middle of nowhere.
Incredible.
Night